Kress had chosen the forest precisely because no one else would. That was the official logic, at least. The unofficial logic was that he had grown tired of people asking him questions he did not want to answer, especially ones that began with, "Why did you disobey?" and ended with paperwork. The forest did not ask questions. It did not file reports. It also did not try to promote him, which Kress considered its finest quality. The trees rose like quiet sentinels, their surfaces threaded with faint bioluminescent veins that pulsed slowly, as if the entire forest was breathing. His scanner flickered uselessly in his hand, displaying a reassuring message that translated roughly to, "I have no idea where you are." Kress sighed and tapped it twice. "Excellent," he muttered. "State-of-the-art equipment, completely lost in a forest that technically shouldn't exist." He kept walking anyway. The ground was soft beneath his boots, layered with strange, fibrous growth that muffled his steps. Even his own breathing sounded too loud here, as though the forest disapproved of unnecessary noise. That made him immediately suspicious. In his experience, anything that quiet usually had a very good reason for it. That was when he smelled it. Smoke. Kress stopped mid-step, his hand instinctively drifting toward the sidearm at his hip. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, listening. The forest did not change. No movement, no voices. Just the faint crackle carried through the air. "Well," he whispered, "either I'm hallucinating, or someone else had the same terrible idea I did." He crouched slightly and moved forward, slower now, weaving between the trees. The glow of the forest dimmed as the firelight grew stronger ahead, flickering against the trunks in uneven patterns. It should not have been there. The neutral zone was monitored, supposedly. No one entered without being noticed, which meant whoever was ahead either didn't care about being noticed or was very good at not being. Kress briefly considered turning around. It was a short consideration. He rejected it immediately. "Curiosity is going to get me killed one day," he said under his breath, "but at least it'll be interesting." The clearing opened suddenly. The fire burned low but steady, contained within a neat ring of blackened stones. Whoever had built it knew exactly what they were doing. That was the first detail Kress registered. The second was the figure sitting beside it. She did not move when he stepped into view. For a moment, Kress thought she hadn't noticed him. Then her head turned, slowly, precisely, and her gaze locked onto his. That ended that theory immediately. Valreth. He knew the type before he even fully processed her features. The armor confirmed it. Layered plates with subtle energy seams, shaped not just for protection, but for fluid, controlled movement. Her posture was relaxed, but it wasn't careless. It was the kind of stillness that suggested she could move faster than he could think about reacting. And then there were the ears. Long, elegant, unmistakable. Kress froze for exactly 1 second. Then he raised both hands slightly. "All right," he said, his voice calm in a way he did not entirely feel. "This is not how I expected my evening to go." She said nothing. The fire crackled softly between them. Kress glanced around the clearing, half expecting an ambush to reveal itself. Nothing. No additional movement. No hidden figures. Just the two of them, standing on opposite sides of a situation that made absolutely no sense. "You're alone?" he asked. She did not answer. She didn't even blink. "Right," he nodded. "Of course you are, because that would be the least concerning explanation." He took a careful step closer to the fire, watching for any reaction. None came. She remained seated, her gaze steady, assessing. Kress exhaled slowly and lowered himself onto a fallen piece of wood across from her, keeping the fire between them. It felt like a reasonable compromise. Also, it felt like the kind of decision he would later regret. "Well," he said after a moment, "since neither of us is currently attacking the other, I'm going to assume we're both too tired to care. That's a good start." Silence answered him again. He rubbed the back of his neck and gave a small, awkward smile. "I should probably introduce myself, but something tells me you're not in a very conversational mood." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus, as if she were trying to determine whether he was serious or simply malfunctioning. "To be fair," Kress added, gesturing vaguely at the surrounding forest, "this is not exactly a normal setting for polite introductions." The fire shifted, sending a brief flare of sparks upward. The light caught along the edges of her armor, tracing its contours in sharp, clean lines. For a brief moment, Kress wondered what kind of battle she had walked away from to end up here. He decided not to ask. "Look," he said, leaning back slightly, "I'm not here for trouble. I came out here to avoid people. You seem to have had a similar idea." That earned him the faintest tilt of her head. Progress, he thought. "Unfortunate overlap," he continued, "but we can work with it." Another pause. Kress stared into the fire, letting the silence stretch. It wasn't entirely uncomfortable, just strange. The kind of strange that didn't feel immediately dangerous, which in his experience made it even more suspicious. After a while, he glanced up again. "You know," he said, "if this turns into one of those situations where we both sit here all night without speaking, I'm going to start telling stories just to fill the silence. And trust me, you don't want that." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. It wasn't quite amusement, but it was close enough. The silence did not break so much as it slowly loosened, like a knot that had decided it was tired of holding itself together. Kress poked at the fire with a thin branch, watching the embers shift and glow brighter for a moment. "You know," he said, "in my experience, when two armed individuals from opposing sides sit this close without trying to eliminate each other, it usually means one of two things." She said nothing, but her gaze flicked briefly to the stick in his hand, then back to his face. "Either we're both extremely professional," he continued, "or we're both extremely tired." A pause. "I'm leaning toward tired." The alien warrior studied him in that same calm, unsettling way. It wasn't hostility. It was something more precise, like she was measuring him against a standard he couldn't see. Kress shifted slightly where he sat. "You're doing that thing again." Her brow moved almost imperceptibly. "That thing where you look at me like I'm a puzzle missing half its pieces," he clarified. "It's very intimidating. Also a little rude." The faintest change in her posture suggested she had heard him. Whether she cared was another matter entirely. "All right," he said, raising one hand in surrender. "Fair. I probably deserve that." The fire crackled softly between them. The surrounding forest seemed to lean inward, listening. Kress let out a quiet breath and glanced upward through the canopy, where faint streaks of distant orbital traffic cut across the night sky. Small, moving lights, ships, satellites, things that reminded him the war was still very much happening beyond this strange pocket of stillness. "Funny thing," he said almost to himself. "Up there, everything's loud. Orders, signals, alarms. Down here," he gestured vaguely around them, "it's like the universe forgot we exist." For a moment, he thought she might ignore that too. Then finally she spoke. "This place is outside mapped conflict zones," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying a tone that felt both distant and precise. "It is disregarded." Kress blinked once, then smiled faintly. "Disregarded. That's a polite way of saying everyone avoids it because it's probably dangerous. I like your version better." She did not react to the humor, but she did not withdraw either. Encouraged, Kress leaned forward slightly. "So you came here on purpose?" A brief pause. "Yes." "Same," he nodded. "Well, mostly. I was also trying to avoid a very persistent officer who believes I should be more cooperative with command structure." Her gaze sharpened slightly at that. "I tried explaining that my relationship with command structure is complicated," he added. They didn't find that reassuring. Another small shift in her expression. Not quite confusion. Not quite understanding. Something in between. Kress pointed at her arm again, more carefully this time. "Your turn." She followed his gesture, her eyes lowering to the faint mark along her armor. "It is not significant," she said. "That's exactly what people say right before it becomes very significant," he replied. "I once ignored a not significant issue and ended up trapped in a maintenance shaft for 6 hours with a malfunctioning cleaning drone." A faint pause. "It kept apologizing," he added. "That was the worst part." There it was again, that subtle, almost invisible shift in her expression. If he wasn't paying attention, he would have missed it. "You speak unnecessarily," she said. Kress grinned. "I've been told that before. Usually right before someone asks me to keep talking, because the silence is worse." She considered that. The fire popped, sending a small burst of sparks upward. One drifted between them before fading into nothing. "You are not afraid," she said after a moment. Kress tilted his head slightly. "Of you?" "Yes." He thought about that for a second, then shrugged. "I probably should be. Statistically speaking, this is a very bad situation for me. And yet, he said, leaning back a little, "you haven't tried to kill me, which suggests either you're not interested or you're waiting for a better opportunity." A beat. I'm choosing to believe the first option. It helps me relax. For the first time, her gaze shifted away from him, if only briefly, toward the fire, toward the space between them. Kress followed her glance, then nodded thoughtfully. "Good fire, by the way, very efficient. Low smoke, stable heat output. I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10. She looked back at him. "What prevents a 10? She asked. He smiled, a little surprised. "Ah, finally, a critic." He leaned forward, inspecting the arrangement of stones. "Spacing's a bit too tight on that side. Limits airflow. You're compensating well, but it's not optimal." A pause, then without a word, she reached out and adjusted one of the stones slightly. The flames shifted, growing steadier, brighter. Kress blinked. "Oh, you actually did it." She withdrew her hand, returning to stillness. "I was mostly joking," he admitted. "I was not," she replied. He let out a quiet laugh. "Noted. I'll be more careful with my expert opinions." The forest remained silent around them, but something had changed. The distance between them, though unchanged in space, felt different. Less like a boundary, more like a shared ground. Kress rested his arms loosely on his knees, watching the fire again. "You ever notice," he said, his voice quieter now, "how strange it is that this is the part people remember?" She did not respond immediately. "The battles, the orders, the strategy, all of that fades," he continued. "But something like this, sitting by a fire, talking to someone you're technically supposed to hate," he shook his head slightly, "that sticks." A long pause followed. Then quietly she said, "This is not typical." Kress smiled faintly. "No," he said, "it really isn't." The fire burned steadily between them, and for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel like something waiting to be filled. It felt like something they were both choosing to keep. The fire settled into a steady rhythm, the kind that made time feel slower than it actually was. Kress leaned forward slightly, turning the thin branch in his fingers before tossing it into the flames. It caught almost immediately, curling into orange light. "You know," he said, "this might be the longest I've gone without someone yelling at me during a mission." Shan's gaze shifted toward him, sharper now, though not unfriendly. "This is not a mission." Kress smiled faintly. "That's exactly why it's going so well." She studied him again, as if still unsure whether he was serious or simply constructed this way. "You speak as if your assignments are unpleasant," she said. "Unpleasant?" he repeated, leaning back slightly. "That's a very elegant way to describe being sent into places where everything is trying to either shoot you, eat you, or file a complaint about your performance afterward." Her brow moved slightly. "File a complaint?" "Long story," he waved it off. "Involves an AI supervisor with a personality module it definitely shouldn't have." A faint pause. "It judged my decision-making," he added, loudly. Shan's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than before, as if that detail had shifted something in her understanding of him. "You continue to serve," she said. Kress let out a quiet breath. "Yeah, funny how that works." He stared into the fire for a moment, watching the light reflect in the subtle metallic layers of her armor. Up close, it was even more intricate than he had first realized. Thin seams pulsing faintly with energy, responding to her movements like a second skin. "That's Valrath tech, right?" he asked, gesturing slightly. "Adaptive plating?" She gave a small nod. "Thought so," he said. "We've got a few salvage pieces back home. None of them work properly. One of our engineers tried to wear a piece once. Thing locked up and refused to move unless he apologized to it." A pause. "I don't know what he did to it," Kress added, "but I respect its commitment." There it was again, that subtle shift in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than before. "You make light of inefficiency," she said. "I make light of everything," he replied. "It's either that or start questioning my life choices, and I've already done that twice this week." The fire flickered, casting soft shadows across the clearing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Shan moved. It was a small motion, but precise. She reached toward her side, adjusting a section of her armor. The movement exposed a faint line beneath it, a deeper mark than before. Not just surface damage. Kress noticed immediately. "That one's definitely significant," he said. Her hand paused. "It will heal," she replied. "Eventually," he said. "But right now it looks like it disagrees with your optimism." She didn't respond, but she didn't cover it again either. Kress hesitated for a moment, then reached into one of his pockets. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out a small, compact device, rounded edges, faintly glowing indicators along its surface. "Before you react," he said, holding it up slightly, "this is not a weapon. It's a field med unit. Very basic. Mostly just tells your body to stop being dramatic." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she watched him. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he added. "I'm just offering an option that doesn't involve you pretending that's nothing." A long pause followed. The forest seemed to lean in again, as if waiting. Then slowly, Shan extended her arm. Kress blinked once. "Huh, that worked faster than expected." He shifted closer to the fire, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. When he reached her, he activated the device. A soft hum filled the air, as a faint blue light scanned across the injury. "Let's see," he muttered, glancing at the display. "Localized energy burn, minor tissue disruption. Yeah, that's definitely not nothing." She watched him closely but did not pull away. "Relax," he said. "I've used this thing before. Only caused permanent damage once." Her eyes narrowed further. "I'm kidding," he added quickly. "Mostly." The device emitted a soft pulse and the light shifted, focusing more precisely on the damaged area. The faint glow of her armor responded, syncing briefly with the med unit's frequency. Kress raised an eyebrow. "That's impressive. Your armor's compensating for the treatment." "It is designed to adapt," she said. "Yeah, ours just complains," he replied. The device beeped softly, indicating it was finished. The discoloration along her arm had faded slightly, the tension in the surrounding area easing. Kress leaned back, powering down the unit. "There, not perfect, but better." She flexed her arm once, testing it. "It is improved," she said. "I'll take that as a glowing endorsement." He smiled. He returned to his side of the fire, settling back into his previous position. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt like something either of them needed. For a while, neither spoke. Then quietly, Shan said, "Why did you assist?" Kress looked at her, then shrugged slightly. "Because you let me." A pause. "And because," he added, "it seemed like the right thing to do." She held his gaze, searching for something in his expression. "You are not logical," she said. Kress let out a soft laugh. "I get that a lot." The fire burned steadily, its light reflecting in both their eyes now. Above them, faint streaks of movement crossed the sky again. Distant ships, distant battles, distant decisions being made by people who would never sit beside a fire like this. Down here, none of that seemed to matter. At least not for now. Kress rested his hands loosely in front of him, glancing at her once more. "So," he said, "since we've officially moved past the silent staring phase and into the minor medical assistance phase, do you have a name, or should I keep referring to you as mysterious and slightly intimidating forest warrior?" A brief pause, then calmly she said, "Shan." Kress nodded, as if that settled something important. "Shan," he repeated. "Good, that's easier to say." He leaned back, a faint smile lingering. "I'm Kress, in case that becomes relevant." She did not respond immediately, but she did not look away. The name lingered in the space between them longer than either of them expected. Kress tapped his fingers lightly against his knee, as if testing how real the moment was. "Shan," he repeated once more, nodding to himself. "That's a solid name. Efficient. No unnecessary syllables. I approve." She watched him, her expression steady. Your approval is not required. Of course not, he said quickly. It's more of a complimentary service I provide. A faint flicker crossed her face again, that almost expression he was beginning to recognize. It was subtle, controlled, like everything else about her. But it was there. Kress leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. So Shan, he said, testing the name more naturally now. You said this place is disregarded. That sounds like a very official way of saying nobody wants to deal with it. It is outside standard surveillance patterns, she replied. Translation, no one's watching, he said. A brief pause. Yes. Kress nodded slowly, glancing around the forest again. The faint glow in the trees pulsed at an almost rhythmic interval, like a slow heartbeat. It made the entire place feel less like terrain and more like something alive that had chosen not to acknowledge them. That explains why my scanner gave up, he muttered. Smart device, knows when it's outmatched. He pulled the scanner from his belt again and tapped it once. The screen flickered, then displayed a series of shifting symbols before settling on a single line. Signal undefined. See? He held it up slightly. Even it's confused, and this thing once mapped an asteroid that kept changing shape just to be annoying. Shan's gaze moved briefly to the device, then back to him. Your equipment is unreliable. Kress placed a hand over his chest in mock offense. My equipment is doing its best under emotionally challenging circumstances. A small pause followed. Also, yes, he added, extremely unreliable. The fire shifted again, casting a new angle of light across the clearing. Shadows stretched and pulled, briefly distorting the shapes of the surrounding trees. Shan's posture changed slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Kress noticed. What? He asked. She was still for a moment, listening. The forest adjusts, she said quietly. Kress blinked. Adjusts how? She tilted her head slightly, focusing on something beyond him. Spatial alignment is not constant. He stared at her for a second. You're telling me the forest moves? Yes. He looked around again, this time more carefully. The trees seemed the same, but something about their spacing, their angles, it was difficult to be certain. That's not ideal, he said. It is why this region is avoided, she replied. Kress exhaled slowly. Of course it is, because a normal forest would be too simple. He leaned back, staring up through the canopy again. All right. Moving trees, confused scanners, unregistered fire, and I'm sharing it with an alien warrior who hasn't decided to eliminate me yet. A beat. I'm starting to think this might not be a relaxing evening after all. Shan's gaze shifted toward him again. You remain. Kress shrugged slightly. Leaving seems complicated now. If the forest rearranges itself, I might walk in a circle and end up right back here. A pause. Which, he added, glancing at her, would be awkward for both of us. Her expression remained steady, but there was something in it now that hadn't been there before. Not quite agreement, not quite concern, awareness. The fire crackled again, louder this time. A small branch collapsed inward, sending a brief flare of sparks upward. Kress reached forward instinctively, adjusting the wood slightly. Can't let it die out, he said. It's the only thing here that makes sense. Shan watched the movement carefully. You rely on it, she said. Of course, he replied. Fire is simple. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. Burns things, provides light, doesn't question your life choices. A brief pause. Unlike certain people I've worked with, he added. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than usual. You avoid structure, she said. Kress smiled faintly. I avoid bad structure. There's a difference. He glanced at her armor again, the faint glow along its seams pulsing in quiet synchronization with her breathing. You don't seem like someone who avoids anything. Shan did not respond immediately. I follow orders, she said at last. Even when they don't make sense? He asked. A pause. Yes. Kress studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. That must be exhausting. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought. It is necessary, she said. Maybe, he replied, but necessary doesn't always mean right. The words settled between them, heavier than anything that had been said so far. For a moment, the forest itself seemed quieter, as if it were listening more closely. Shan's gaze shifted away from him, toward the fire. The battle I left, she said slowly, was executed without error. Kress tilted his head. That doesn't sound like something you'd walk away from. It should not be, she replied. But you did, he said. A longer pause followed this time. The outcome was predetermined, she said. Kress frowned slightly. Predetermined how? No resistance beyond calculated thresholds, she continued. Enemy positions were expected. Responses were delayed. It was not conflict. Kress leaned forward slightly, his expression sharpening. You're saying it wasn't a real fight? Yes. He let out a quiet breath. That's not good. No. The fire shifted again, its light reflecting in both their eyes. Kress rubbed the back of his neck, thinking. We've seen things like that too, he said. Operations that feel staged, like someone already knows how it's going to end. Shan looked at him again, more directly now. You have observed this? She asked. Not as clean as what you're describing, he said, but enough to make me uncomfortable, which for the record is my default state. A faint pause. But this, he added, gesturing slightly, that sounds bigger. She did not deny it. The forest shifted again, just slightly, but this time Kress noticed. The angle of one of the trees had changed, its position no longer quite where it had been before. Okay, he said quietly. I officially don't like this place. Shan's gaze flicked briefly toward the movement, then back to him. It is stable. For now, she said. For now, he repeated. Great. Very reassuring. He exhaled slowly, then looked at her again, a faint smile returning despite everything. Well, he said, on the bright side, if the forest decides to rearrange itself completely, at least I'll have someone equally confused to deal with it. A brief pause. Then very faintly, Shan said, You assume I would remain? Kress smiled slightly wider. I'm optimistic like that. The fire burned steadily between them, holding its ground even as the world around it refused to stay still. The forest shifted again, more noticeably this time. Kress didn't move at first. He just watched it happen. The subtle slide of a tree several meters to the left, the way the glowing veins along its bark pulsed faster for a moment, as if something deep beneath the ground had made a decision. Right, he said quietly. That's definitely new. Shan was already standing. The movement had been silent, precise, as if she had simply chosen a different position and the world had adjusted to accommodate it. Her gaze swept the clearing, tracking changes Kress could barely follow. You felt that before it happened, didn't you? He asked. Yes. Good, he nodded. Because I felt nothing, which means I am completely unqualified to survive whatever this is. She did not respond, but she didn't dismiss him either. Another shift. This time Kress felt it, a faint pull in the air, like gravity had briefly forgotten its usual direction. The fire flickered, the flames bending sideways for a split second before correcting themselves. Okay, he said, standing now as well. That's not just trees. That's the entire environment having a disagreement with physics. Shan stepped closer to the edge of the clearing, her posture tightening. It is accelerating. Of course it is, Kress muttered. Why wouldn't it? He moved beside her, though not too close, keeping the fire at his back. The forest beyond the clearing no longer looked stable. The distances between trees seemed inconsistent, their positions shifting in ways that made it difficult to focus. If we walk into that, he said, we might not come out in the same direction or the same time. Shan glanced at him. Time displacement is unlikely. Unlikely is not the same as impossible, he replied. A pause. I've had a week, he added. The ground beneath them gave a faint tremor. Not violent, but enough to confirm that whatever was happening was not superficial. Shan's hand moved toward her side, resting near the hilt of a compact weapon integrated into her armor. Kress noticed. You planning to shoot the forest? If necessary. He nodded slowly. I admire the confidence. Another shift. This one was sharper. A tree at the far edge of the clearing snapped from one position to another with a sudden, disorienting motion, as if a frame had been skipped in reality itself. Kress winced. Yeah, I don't like that at all. The fire flared suddenly, growing brighter, stronger, without any additional fuel. The flames rose higher than before, their color deepening to a more intense orange, almost white at the core. Shan turned toward it immediately. It is reacting, she said. To what? Kress asked. She did not answer. The light from the fire expanded slightly, pushing back against the shifting darkness of the forest. For a brief moment, the clearing felt anchored, stable in a way the surrounding area was not. Kress blinked. Wait! He stepped closer to the fire, crouching slightly as he studied it. This wasn't just a campfire, was it? Shan remained still. You built this deliberately, he said, looking up at her. Not just for warmth. A pause. Yes. Kress let out a quiet breath, half impressed, half concerned. Of course you did. He gestured toward the flames. This is stabilizing the area, isn't it? Keeping the shifts from reaching us? Yes. He stood slowly, glancing around again. The edges of the clearing now looked strained, like something was pressing against an invisible boundary and being held back. And if the fire goes out? He asked. Shan met his gaze directly. The stabilization fails. Kress nodded once. All right. So the plan is simple. He gestured at the fire. We keep that alive. Another tremor ran through the ground, slightly stronger this time. The air felt heavier, charged with a low, almost inaudible hum. Simple, he repeated. Not easy. He moved quickly now, scanning the clearing for anything usable. We need more fuel, something that burns steady. Shan was already in motion, moving to the edge of the clearing and retrieving a bundle of dense, fibrous branches. She placed them carefully near the fire. Kress crouched again, adjusting the arrangement with practiced movements. All right, let's see if we can convince this thing to cooperate. He added the new material slowly, watching how the flames responded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fire surged again, stronger than before. The pressure at the edges of the clearing eased slightly. Kress exhaled. Good, that's good. He glanced up at Shan. You've done this before? Yes. Of course you have, he said, because why wouldn't you have experience with reality distorting forests? Another shift, closer this time. The boundary of the clearing flickered, the trees beyond it blurring as if their positions were no longer fixed. Kress stood again, his expression tightening. How long does this last? Shan's gaze remained steady. Until it resolves. That's not a time frame, he said. It is not predictable. Great, he muttered. I love unpredictable situations. They're my favorite kind of terrible. Despite the tension, a faint, familiar edge of humor crept into his voice. It wasn't forced. It was how he stayed balanced when everything else wasn't. Shan watched him for a moment. You continue to make light of danger, she said. Kress gave a small shrug. If I don't, it makes light of me, and I don't like losing that kind of argument. The fire burned brighter now, its light steady, pushing back against the instability pressing in from all sides. For a moment, the two of them stood there, side by side, watching the shifting forest and the steady flames between them. Two strangers, no orders, no command. Just a shared problem. Kress glanced at her briefly. You know, he said, this is still not the strangest situation I've been in. A pause. But it's getting close. For the first time, Shan's expression shifted just enough to be unmistakable. Not a smile, but something very close to it. The pressure did not disappear, but it changed. Kress felt it first as a subtle easing, like something large had stopped pushing quite so hard against the edges of the clearing. The fire responded immediately, its flames settling into a steadier, more controlled burn. The violent flickers smoothed into a consistent glow. Okay, he said slowly, watching the boundary of the clearing. Either we're winning, or this place is taking a break before doing something worse. Shan did not move from her position, but her stance shifted, less rigid, though still alert. The fluctuations are stabilizing. That sounds promising, Kress replied. I'm going to pretend that means we're not about to be rearranged into abstract shapes. The forest beyond them still moved, but more slowly now. The disorienting jumps had softened into gradual shifts, like something correcting itself rather than breaking apart. Kress crouched near the fire again, adjusting one of the larger pieces of fuel. "You ever notice," he said, "that in situations like this, the universe always gives you just enough hope to make things more stressful?" Shan glanced at him. "Your observations are unusual." "That's a polite way of saying I complain a lot," he said. "It is accurate." He smiled faintly. "I appreciate the honesty." The fire gave a low, steady crackle. Its light no longer flared wildly but held firm, like an anchor in the middle of something that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. Kress leaned back slightly, resting his hands on the ground behind him. "So," he said, "this stabilization, it doesn't last forever, does it?" Shan's gaze returned to the forest. "No, of course not," he nodded. "That would be too convenient." A brief silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It felt like something waiting, something in between tension and release. Kress looked at her again. "You said you've done this before." "Yes." "And you survived," he added. She did not respond immediately. "Yes," she said. "That's encouraging," he replied. "I like proven methods, especially the ones that don't end with me being turned into a cautionary tale." Her eyes shifted toward him again, studying him in that same precise way. "You assume you would not survive without assistance?" she said. Kress considered that. "I assume I would survive in a very inconvenient way," he said, "possibly missing something important." A faint pause. "Like my sense of direction," he added, "which is already struggling." The corner of Shan's mouth moved again, barely noticeable but undeniably there. Kress caught it this time. "There it is," he said, pointing slightly. "You almost smiled." "I did not." "You absolutely did," he insisted. "It was brief, but I saw it." It was not a smile. "Fine," he said, a non-hostile facial adjustment. That earned him a longer pause. Then quietly, "That is acceptable." Kress grinned. "I'll take it." The forest shifted again, but now it felt distant, less aggressive. The boundary of the clearing held firm, the fire maintaining its quiet dominance over the space. For a while neither of them spoke. Kress let his gaze drift upward again, toward the thin gaps in the canopy where faint streaks of movement still crossed the sky. The war was still there, loud, constant, unresolved. Down here it felt paused. "You left your unit," he said after a moment. Shan's gaze did not leave the fire. "Yes. That's not something your people do lightly," he added. "No." Kress nodded slowly. "Same on our side. You walk away from a unit, it raises questions, uncomfortable ones." A pause. "And usually a lot of paperwork," he added. She glanced at him briefly. "You reference this often." "It's a recurring theme in my life," he said. "A tragic one." The fire shifted slightly as another piece of fuel settled into place. Shan's voice was quieter when she spoke again. "The battle I described, it was not the first." Kress turned his head toward her. "You've seen more like that." "Yes." He frowned slightly. "Predetermined outcomes. Controlled engagements." "Yes." "That's not war," he said. "No." The words settled heavily between them. Kress exhaled slowly. "We've had operations like that too. Not as clean, but close enough to make people uneasy." He rubbed his hands together absently, thinking. "At first I thought it was just bad intelligence. Then I thought it was coincidence." A pause. "Now I'm starting to think it's neither." Shan watched him closely now, her attention fully focused. "You believe there is external control," she said. "I believe," Kress replied carefully, "that too many things are happening exactly the way someone would want them to." The fire crackled softly. "And that someone," he added, "is not sitting around a campfire in a forest that can't decide where it is." Shan's gaze held his. "No," she said, "they are not." Another shift passed through the forest, but it barely registered now. The clearing remained steady, the fire unwavering. For a moment, the tension that had filled the air earlier seemed to fade. Not gone, but quieter, pushed back by something else. Understanding. Kress leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees again. "You know," he said, This is probably the most productive conversation I've had in months. A faint pause. And that's saying something, he added. Shan tilted her head slightly. You find this productive? Absolutely, he said. We've identified a potentially massive problem, shared useful information, and no one has tried to eliminate the other. He nodded once. That's a solid outcome. For the first time, Shan did not immediately respond. Instead, she looked at the fire, then back at him. Yes, she said quietly. It is. The flames reflected in her eyes, steady and bright. Kress smiled faintly, then glanced back toward the forest. Let's just hope, he said, that whatever's out there doesn't realize we've started asking questions. The fire burned on, silent and unwavering, as if it understood exactly how important that hope was. The first sign that the night was ending was not the light. It was the silence. Not the kind they had shared before, not the quiet between words or the steady calm of the fire, but something deeper. The forest stopped shifting, completely, as if whatever force had been pulling at its structure had finally decided it was finished. Kress noticed it immediately. That's new, he said softly. Shan was already standing, her attention fixed on the edges of the clearing. This time nothing moved. The trees held their positions. The air felt still, not tense, not waiting, just settled. It has resolved, she said. Kress let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Good. I prefer my surroundings when they obey basic reality. He stood, brushing his hands lightly against his pants. The fire had lowered slightly, no longer burning with that intense, stabilizing force. It didn't need to. For the first time since he had arrived, the forest felt like a place, not a problem. Well, he said, glancing around, I think this means we survived. A brief pause. Again, he added. Shan's posture shifted, not relaxing entirely, but easing in a way that hadn't been possible before. It is safe to leave, she said. Kress nodded slowly. Yeah, looks like it. Neither of them moved. The fire crackled quietly between them, smaller now, softer. The kind of fire that marked an ending rather than held back a threat. Kress looked at it for a moment, then reached down and adjusted one of the remaining pieces of wood. Not to strengthen it, just to keep it alive a little longer. You know, he said, this is usually the part where people say something important. Shan glanced at him. Something meaningful, he clarified. Memorable. The kind of thing that gets repeated later. A pause. I'm not very good at though, he admitted. She studied him for a moment, then said, You have said enough. Kress smiled faintly. That might be the nicest way anyone's ever told me to stop talking. Another brief silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. Just full. He glanced at her again. So, he said, what happens now? Shan looked past him, toward one side of the forest, the direction she had likely chosen long before he had arrived. I return, she said. Kress nodded. To your unit. Yes. He considered that for a moment, then asked, Even after what you saw? A pause. Shan's gaze returned to him. I return differently. Kress held her gaze, understanding settling in quietly. Yeah, he said. That makes sense. He shifted slightly, glancing toward the opposite direction, the one he had come from. It looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. Guess I'll be doing the same, he added. A faint pause. Without telling anyone I was here, he said. That is advisable, Shan replied. Kress smiled. Good. We agree on something else. The fire flickered one last time, its light soft against the stillness of the clearing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kress straightened slightly, his tone lighter again. All right, he said. Before we both walk off into our respective questionable decisions, he hesitated just briefly. Try not to get yourself killed, he finished. Shan tilted her head slightly as if considering the statement. You as well, she said. Kress nodded once. Fair. Another pause. Then without ceremony, he turned. He didn't look back immediately. He took a few steps forward, testing the ground, half expecting the forest to shift again, just to prove a point. It didn't. After a few more steps, he stopped. Shan, he said, without turning. A brief silence behind him. Yes. He considered his words for a second, then let out a small breath. If the war starts making even less sense than it already does, he said, I'm going to assume you noticed it too. A pause. Yes, she replied. Kress nodded to himself. Good. He took another step forward, then another. This time he didn't stop. Behind him, the fire dimmed further, its light fading into the growing brightness of dawn. The forest remained still, as if it had already forgotten the instability that had defined it hours before. Shan remained where she was for a moment longer, watching the direction he had gone. Then she turned as well, in a different direction. No words, no signal, no acknowledgement beyond what had already been said. They walked away from the clearing as if it had never mattered. And yet, it had. Days later, Kress found himself standing in a command room, staring at a tactical display that felt wrong. Enemy movements too precise, engagements too predictable. The same quiet pattern he hadn't been able to name before. He didn't follow the order immediately. That was new. You hesitated, someone said behind him. Kress glanced at the display again, then shrugged slightly. Just thinking. He adjusted the input parameters, subtly altering the execution. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to change the outcome. Elsewhere, far beyond his reach, Shan stood among her own command structure, listening to a strategy briefing that sounded too clean, too certain. She spoke. That was new. Not loudly, not confrontationally, just enough to introduce doubt where there had been none. The plan shifted, slightly. No one traced it back to a moment in a forest that did not appear on any map. No one recorded the conversation beside a fire that had no official purpose. But something had changed. Not the war. Not yet. Just the way two people moved within it. And sometimes that was where change began.